Hey guys! So old photographs have a unique energy that is capable of transporting us to eras and moments that seem lost in time. When we look at these photographs, they awaken strong emotions and feelings within us. Some evoke nostalgia, prompting us to remember happy moments and significant events in our lives. Others can evoke longing or sadness, reminding us of people and times that are no longer with us. However, regardless of the emotions they evoke, these old photographs serve as witnesses to history, embodying moments that now exist only on paper. They allow us to glimpse into the past and see how people lived, what they achieved, and the joys and sorrows they experienced. In today's video, we will take you on a trip into the fascinating world of old photographs to learn more about the people, places, and events of the past. The builders who constructed the legendary 102-story Empire State Building in New York are definitely some of the bravest individuals on the planet. They managed to complete the construction of the building that had no equal in the 20th century in just 410 days, from 1929 to 1931. In 1914, during World War I, 100,000 British and German soldiers agreed to a ceasefire during the Christmas truce. Soldiers decorated trenches, sang Christmas hymns, and exchanged gifts such as food, tobacco, alcohol, and souvenirs. In 1971, 17-year-old Julianne Krepke was ejected from a plane struck by lightning. Strapped to her seat, she fell to the ground from a height of over 3 kilometers, spent 10 days in the Amazon jungle, and survived. 10 days later, she found a boat moored near a shelter and discovered that the fuel tank was still partially full. Krepke poured gasoline on her wounds to rid herself of maggots. Out of the 93 passengers and crew, only Julianne survived the plane crash of Lanza Flight 508, which occurred on December 24, 1971. Canary girls at a munitions factory in England, 1917. During World War I, women working in British weapon factories producing artillery shells were nicknamed Canary girls because of their yellow skin color. Trinitrotoluene used in the shells caused severe liver damage, leading to a professional disease known as jaundice. Around 80% of all British weapons and ammunition used in World War I were produced by women. This photograph is from 1961. Ernest Hemingway is posing with his beloved shotgun. Early on the morning of June 2, 1961, the writer's wife, Mary, found him dead on the floor in one of the houses in Idaho. Hemingway would die by this shotgun. In the last years of his life, the writer believed that he was being watched. He had been hospitalized in psychiatric clinics multiple times. He was certain that bugs were placed around him and that the FBI was following him. He underwent electroshock therapy, but to no avail. It was only nearly 50 years after Hemingway's death that the FBI admitted that they had indeed been monitoring him, suspecting the Nobel laureate's involvement with Cuban revolutionaries. The bugs were really placed in his car, garage, house, and even hospital room. He was right, but no one believed him. Soldiers' boots scattered along a road on the outskirts of Saigon. These were discarded by South Vietnamese soldiers who hurriedly removed their uniforms to hide their affiliation with the army. I will never forget these boots and the loud sound of thud, thud, thud as we drove over them, the photographer recalled. Decades of war have ended, and peace has finally come. 1975. The photograph shows the first McDonald's in San Bernardino, California, USA, which opened in May 1940. Founded by the McDonald brothers, Richard and Maurice, the restaurant sold hamburgers for 15 cents, while the golden arches in the form of the letter M had not yet been invented. The first location only offered takeout. The company has come a long way since then, having become the world's largest restaurant chain by revenue. As of 2018, there were nearly 38,000 locations in over 100 countries. Catherine Wright, the younger sister of the Wright brothers, is getting ready for her older brother Wilbur to take her on a plane for the first time in February 1909 in France. The Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur, are credited with inventing and flying the world's first airplane. On December 17, 1903, the first controlled and sustained flight of an airplane with a mechanical engine took place in North Carolina. This 1886 picture shows Otto Lilienthal on his glider, taking off from an artificial hill called Aviation Hill, or Fly Hill, in Lichterfelde, near Berlin. The German engineer designed gliders inspired by birds, allowing him to make the first controlled flight on a glider in 1891. Over the next few years, he continued to refine his designs, and by 1893, he had soared from a height of 24 meters to over 244 meters. In 1922, scientists entered a room with dying children who were in diabetic comas. Their loved ones had already started mourning them. However, the doctors administered a new medication, insulin, to each child. Before the doctors could administer the injection to the last child in the room, the first one had already awakened. One by one, all the children regained consciousness. The room of death and sorrow was filled with joy and hope. Miss Correct Posture, Lois Conway, with Marianne Kaba, left, and Ruth Swenson at a competition held in Chicago during a chiropractors convention in 1956. The winners were evaluated based on their beauty, x-rays, and posture. Such contests were very popular at the time, since chiropractors didn't yet have licenses, and this was their way of promoting the profession. Their main premise was that good posture led to good health, and that chiropractors were the way to achieve it. Although these contests were very popular in the 1950s and 60s, they disappeared when chiropractors started getting licensed, and this form of advertising became unnecessary. Photo illustration of the work of American orthopedic surgeon Louis A. Sayer from 1877. Spinal disease and spinal curvature. The image recommended that patients with spinal curvature hang themselves twice a day on a contraption resembling a tripod for disciplining misbehaving soldiers. In these strange photographs, Sayer and his assistants stood alongside, resembling martyr saints. Dr. Sayer described many patients as working-class people, robust and surprisingly healthy, whose deformities he attributed to heavy physical labor in childhood, carrying coal buckets, poor school conditions, and frequent falls due to parental neglect. In the mid-20th century, the fashion trend of bullet bras emerged among Western women, primarily Americans. With boning perpendicular to the body, they truly resembled the conical part of a bullet. The popularity of this type of lingerie was propelled by the so-called sweater girls, Hollywood actresses who began wearing bullets under woolen sweaters. By the 1960s, the fashion trend shifted, and everyone forgot about the bullet bras. Some believe that the world's first off-road vehicle was the front-wheel drive car on Caterpillar tracks created by engineer Adolf Kagreise for the Russian Tsar Nicholas II in 1917. It is known that the Tsar was a big fan of cars and had a complete collection of Rolls-Royce, Mercedes, and Packard cars, onto which Adolf eventually installed flexible rubber tracks. It appears to be a Rolls-Royce in the photograph. Janis Joplin was one of the most talented and successful rock stars of the 1960s, having released several albums before her untimely death in 1970. Bouts of alcohol and drug addiction took a toll on her performances, for example, at Woodstock, and eventually led to a fatal drug overdose at the age of 27. The music world was shaken, especially since another popular rock artist, Jimi Hendrix, had died just a couple of weeks before, also at the age of 27. Among other musicians who died at the same age are Kurt Cobain of Nirvana and Jim Morrison of The Doors. They became known as the 27 Club, which also includes the Rolling Stones founding member Brian Jones, Amy Winehouse, and Alexander Bashilchev. Barbary lions, an extinct population of the subspecies Panthera leo, inhabited the coastal regions of North Africa, from the Atlas Mountains to Egypt. With the spread of firearms in the world of hunting, people began to hunt lions for sport and decimated their population in an instant. In this photograph taken in 1925, during a flight on the Casablanca-Dakar air route, the last recorded specimen of the Barbary lion was captured before the subspecies went extinct. There is a theory that these lions existed until 1965, but remained hidden in the wilds of Algeria and Morocco. However, this assertion is impossible to prove, since it's nearly impossible to find a witness to an animal's disappearance. The story of Henry Ziegland made the word karma famous back in the 19th century. A man named Ziegland decided to break up with his beloved, and she, unable to bear the separation, decided to take her own life in 1883. The girl's despairing brother attempted to kill Henry. Shooting him in the dark, he believed the bullet had hit its target, so he then proceeded to shoot himself. However, Henry survived. The bullet grazed his face and lodged in a tree trunk nearby. Several years later, the ill-fated tree continued to remind Ziegland of the tragedy that had befallen him. The decision was simple. The tree needed to be felled, but the trunk was too large, so Henry decided to dynamite the base of the tree to bring it down. Henry died as a result of that explosion. It's rumored that the very same bullet broke free from the tree during that blast and hit Ziegland in the head, ending the chain of deaths. Violet Constance Jessup, 1915. Irish-Argentine stewardess Violet Constance Jessup often found herself in the wrong place at the wrong time. She had worked aboard the liner Olympic when it collided with the British warship Hawke in 1911. The Olympic was then towed to port. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, the Olympic wasn't the last eventful ship in Jessup's life. A year later, she was on board the Titanic when it sank in 1912. Afterward, Jessup was also on board the Britannic, which sank in 1916 due to an explosion caused by a mine. Once it became known that Violet had been on these ill-fated ships, she earned the nickname Miss Unsinkable. Photograph taken on the day of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. As is known, the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand became the official trigger for the start of World War I. The car in which the tragedy occurred was later sent to a well-known museum. 20 years later, a British man noticed an intriguing detail in the car, namely the license plate A111118. Interestingly, the peace treaty that marked the end of World War I was signed on November 11, 1918. This date can also be written as 11/11/18. Coat sale in Copenhagen, Denmark in 1936. Stocked with men's fall and winter coats, a clothing salesman came up with a marketing trick. He surrounded his store with scaffolding and hung over 1,000 coats from the roof to the sidewalk. The idea was very successful, and potential buyers came in such crowds that the police had to be called to maintain order in the line. During the Victorian era, Britain urbanized quite rapidly. By 1851, it became the first country where more people lived in cities than in the rest of the country combined. The food industry developed rapidly during those years, and local butchers had plenty of work. This is what meat shops looked like back then, without refrigerators. These photos are truly unique. A photograph taken in 1900 in northern India. Local residents used animal hides as makeshift rafts to ferry across the river. At the moment the photo was taken, They were inflating these animal hides. The enormous Ferris wheel at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, 1893. The Ferris wheel consisted of 36 compartments, each of which could hold 60 people. A total of 2,160 passengers could ride the Ferris wheel simultaneously. Well, that's all for today, friends. Hit that like button if you found this video interesting. Let me know the coolest thing that you learned in the comments, and we'll see you next time.